Chapter 1 of Across the Andes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Across the Andes by Charles Johnson Post. Old Panama, Agamemnon, and the Genial Picaroon. It was in Panama, the old Panama, and in front of the faded and blistered hotel that I met him again. A barefooted, soft-voiced mozo had announced that a person, a somebody, was awaiting me below. Down in the broken tiled lobby, a soured saffron clerk pointed scornfully to the outside. Silhouetted against the hot shimmer that boiled up from the street was a jaunty figure in a native flapping muslin jacket, native rope-soled shoes, and dungaree breeches, carefully rolling a cigarette from a little bag of Army Durham. It turned, and, from beneath the frayed brim of a native hat, there beamed upon me the genial assurance of Bert, one time of the Fifth Army Corps Santiago de Cuba, and occasionally of New York, and within my heart I rejoiced. Without, I made a signal that secured a bottle of green, bilious, lukewarm native beer, and settled myself placidly for entertainment. A panicky quarantine stretched up and down some few thousand miles of the West Coast that left the steamer schedules a straggling chaos. For 15 dull, broiling days I had swapped hopes and rumors with the polyglot steamship clerk, or hung idly over the balcony of the Hotel Marina watching the buzzards hopping about the mudflats, or grouped hopefully under the quarter of a slimy smack. Once I had inspected the Colombian Navy that happened to be lying off the Boca, and observed a brand-new pair of white flannels go to their ruin, as a drunken Scotch engineer teetered down an iron ladder with a lidless coal-oil lamp, waving in discursive gestures. Once I had met a mild, dull person who had just come up Magdalena Riverway with a chunk of gold that he assured me, without detail, had been hacked off by a machete, but here his feeble imagination flickered out, and he wrapped the rest in a poorly wrought mystery, until finally he fluttered over to Cologne for the next steamer of innocent possibilities. With these, the respectable amusements were exhausted, and I therefore rejoiced as I confronted that cheerful, raconteuring adventurer under the battered Panama. A ship's purser, a drummer of smoked hams, a Coney Island barker, a soldier, a drifter, and always a teller of tales, he had lain in the trenches on Misery Hill before Santiago in support of Capron's battery, with a gaunt group around him as he wove the drifting thread of adventure from the Bowery to the Barbary coast in a series of robust anecdotes, and they bore the earmarks of truth. Now, in the genial silhouette framed against the tropic glare, I realized that whatever days of waiting might be in store, they would no longer be dull. A true rumor had put him in a lone commercial venture somewhere down these coasts, and here at my elbows was to be placed all the shift and coil of petty adventure, whimsical romance, and the ultimate results of 2 years of adroit piracy in and out of the Spanish Main that had ended, as I observed, in dungaree breeches, rope-soled alpargatas, and a battered Panama hat. Therefore, through the ministrations of an occasional bottle of the native bilious beer and other transactions that shall remain private, the days sped themselves swiftly and unheeded, guided by the adept hand of romance. Again, as in the trenches, I viewed the world under Asmodean influences, but what I heard has no place in these pages. It is worth an endeavor all its own. Then, one morning, the news spread that at last the Mapocho lay at the Boca, and the hour of departure for the first stage to the interior of South America was at hand. The night before was the last I saw of my genial friend. In the morning he did not appear, and it was strange, for I had expected to do the proper thing as I saw it, realizing that dungarees and alpargatas are poor armor, and that our consulates offer but a desperate and prickly hospitality. In the afternoon I went aboard, crawling down a gangway that dropped to the deck like a ladder where, in the morning, it had reared itself with equal steepness against the Mapocho's sides. Such are the Pacific tides at the Boca. Agamemnon, the shriveled little Barbados darky, scuttled about importantly, stowing our baggage and giving an occasional haughty order to some steward in a nondescript patois that passed mainly as Spanish, and that often served, as I learned, better than the purest Ollendorfian Castilian. Later it appeared that Agamemnon had left one of these same steamers under a cloud, a trifling matter of a few sheets and pillowcases, and now to return clothed with trust and authority over "the fixin's and the baggage of gentmen's," swelled him with an inarticulate triumph. In the long months that followed, none could have given more faithful service or loyalty than this skimpy Barbados darky. That is, within his limitations, for he could no more resist liquor than a bear can honey, but nevertheless, when he had transgressed, his uncertain legs would bring him back to his duties, speechless perhaps, but with arms wavering and gestures of extenuation. Also, to Agamemnon, wages meant nothing. A shilling now and again, sometimes even the equivalent of a whole dollar, advanced him with the specific understanding that it was for gambling and not for liquor. Once, in La Paz, he won $150 Mex and became an impossible animal until it had been frittered away. In the same city, he went to the bullfight and joined in the play against the final bull that is dedicated to the people, and fought so cleverly that we became prominent by reflection, and gave a party at the corrida the following Sunday to see Agamemnon's promised performance. By this time, Agamemnon had become a character, and a score of little boys scrambled over the barrier eager to hold his hat, his coat, and his cuffs. With a flourish he handed each to its eager guardian, and then, with a coat held as a capa, gave a flourish and advanced toward the bull. The crowd applauded. Agamemnon made a bow and a flourish and waggled the coat. The bull snuffled briskly and charged. Alas, the hand had lost its cunning, for Agamemnon shot 10 feet skyward, turned an involuntary somersault at the apex of his flight, and then sprawled back to earth. A half-dozen of the toreros drew off the bull. The small boy custodians flung his garments at him scornfully, while the Bolivian audience laughed itself hoarse as the dusty, disheveled figure hobbled out of the ring and away from the crowd. For himself, Agamemnon asked but little, although where he felt that the dignity of his position was involved, he became a tower of strength. It was in the same city that he felt the hotel people were not treating him fairly, as they were not, and his remonstrance was met by a cholo mozo who hurled a sugar bowl at his head and followed it up with a knife. Agamemnon dodged and beat down the Indian with a chair. On the instant, a half-dozen cholos poured at him, and the kitchen was in a riot. Backing away, he denuded the dining tables of service and used it as a light artillery fire. By the aid of an earthenware jar, some handy crockery, and a chair, he was able to retreat safely across the patio and up the stairway that led to our rooms. A water pitcher laid open a skull, and a washbowl stopped the rush long enough for him to grab a gun from the pillow when we arrived. Together with some stubby Bolivian police and the bony Russian proprietor, order was restored. Fortunately, for it might have been serious. Agamemnon explained satisfactorily, and incidentally showed only a minor bump or so, but his Cholo and Aymara antagonists bore most proper marks of the conflict. That night, in the midst of his shoe polishing and packing, he remarked briefly, "If you gentmens hadn't come just then, I cert'nly'd have licked them fellers, boss." Apparently, no victory was complete to his mind until he had accomplished a massacre. At another time, he waded into a crowd of cholos in the interior and took from them their machetes and shotguns, acting on his own initiative, because he knew that in that far interior laborers were too precious to waste by their own fighting. From our tent we heard 2 shots and the rising yells of a small riot, and then, before there was time to grab a gun or gather the few white men, the figure of Agamemnon staggered up the crest of the river bank with his arms full of the commandeered machetes and trade guns. There was the time when a balsa upset in a boiling eddy, and Agamemnon jumped in as a faithful rescuer, only to still further complicate matters. Also when... But it is useless. Agamemnon is a story in himself. Tireless, uncomplaining, honest, loyal, yet of the aimless tribe of Bandar Log, apparently only merely the mouse of a man in a wrinkled black skin, and yet the paragon of retainers. Peace be to him wherever he has drifted. At the table that evening on the Mapocho, the few passengers looked each other over in the customary standoffish way. A couple of fresh-faced young Englishmen adventuring to clerkships, a German commercial traveler, an expert in those Latin countries who makes one blush for the self-complacent, brusque, greaser-hating jingos that are only too typical of our export efforts, 3 mining engineers, a returning Peruvian diplomat for whose presence we later blessed him, and a couple of native Ecuadorian families, wealthy cacao haciendados, who flocked by themselves in a slatternly, noisy group. But by the next evening, drawn together by the prospect of a tedious, uncertain voyage through erratic quarantines, we were one large family. We lay back in our canvas chairs under the galvanized iron roof of the upper deck. So generally peaceful are those seas that the awning is permanent, and watched the Southern Cross flickering dimly above the southern horizon. The cigars glowed in silence, for, though it was the hour for yarning, each bashfully hung back. Then an engineer started. The Philippines, Alaska, the boom camps, Mexico rose in successive backgrounds, and then the talk shifted round to our respective objectives down this long coast. One was for the nitrate fields, one for the Peruvian silver mines, and one for the rich placer banks of the far interior. The one who was bound for an examination of Peruvian silver mines, a mountain of a man, finally made a confidence. "Gold," he remarked as an obvious preliminary. "Gold or silver, I'm a Bryan man, is generally good enough for anyone, but if I had my choice, I don't mind saying that I'd rather have a coal mine down here in South America than either or anything." The others sighed enviously. A coal mine in South America where there is no coal, except that from Australia and Wales, and where a couple of 100 miles from the coast it is worth $20 gold a ton. A coal mine. Well, it is the stuff of which dreams are made in South America. "Yes, sir," he went on raptly. "Coal is the thing, and I don't mind admitting that I've got it." He hauled a black object from his pocket and held it out. Eagerly it was snatched from his hand. There it was, hard, shiny, black, varying in no way from those in the kitchen scuttle at home, a splendid sample of anthracite coal. It was too good. They laughed. "Bring it from home?" they asked pleasantly. The mountainous engineer chuckled contentedly. "That's anthracite, and as fine a specimen as I ever saw. I don't mind talking a little freely, since I've got it covered in an ironclad contract. You see," he went on good-naturedly, "I'm always wide awake, and the morning we left Boca, a young chap came aboard, American, too, and right pleasant-spoken, where I was sort of loafing, and we got acquainted. To make a long story short, he'd been wandering around up in the back country of Colombia and had located this coal. He didn't have any special idea of what coal meant down these ways. He was from Pennsylvania, son of a pit boss or something, and coal was as common to him as water to a duck. But when he pulled out a couple of these samples, you bet I froze fast. He tried to be mighty quiet and mysterious when he saw I was interested. You know how such a chap is when he thinks he's got a good thing, and he was sort of on the beach. Down on his luck, you know, but I pumped him all right. He had a fool idea of going home as best he could and then taking the family stock and combining it with other family stocks and coming back and opening up his coal mine." The big engineer chuckled again. "Why, there's a king's fortune in that mine, so your Uncle Jim stepped right in and tied him up close. I cabled my principals, and I'll get a cable when we reach Callao. This coal makes their silver look like 30 cents. Of course, I wasn't going to take any chances at this stage. It might be phony, but that fellow is on the level. Said he wouldn't take any money down, not that I'd have given it by a long shot. But after I got back, he joined me and come back into Colombia. He gave me a map of the location in case of accident." "Gave him no money?" "Poor fella! Art for art's sake?" asked one. "Well, yes." The big man nodded good-humoredly. $30, enough to take him back to the States steerage. I felt almost ashamed. Said he didn't need any more to get home with. That sounded on the level, didn't it? He'd had a tough time, all right. Fever, grub, and etc. back in the country, and was down to dungaree breeches, rope-soled shoes, and one of these slimsy native calico jackets. "And he could roll a cigarette with one hand better than most can with two?" I asked. The big engineer paused for an instant's thought and then suddenly sat up. No wonder my friend of the Fifth Army Corps in the dungaree breeches, alpargatas, and battered Panama and muslin jacket had suddenly disappeared. 30 large golden dollars of real money, good at par in the States or for 3 pecks of local paper collateral anywhere on the Mosquito Coast. And all that for one paltry little yarn. End of Chapter 1. Read by James T. Oligny.